Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the Timberwolves may have found a solution for one of their biggest problems over the first month of the season, the non-Rudy Gobert defensive minutes, why they've improved drastically of late. It's all coming next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. That's right. Locked On is the number one sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day. Today on the show, we're going to dig in on one of the Wolves' biggest issues to this point in the season, or at least until the last, couple of weeks, so call it the first 3 to 4 weeks of the season. Some of the biggest issues have been the non-Rudy Gobert defensive minutes, right? The Wolves offense has been good with Gobert off the floor. The defense has been horrific. The reverse is true when Gobert's on the floor. But the gap between the Rudy and non-Rudy offense is not as big as the gap between the Rudy non-Rudy defense, or at least that's been the case until recently. So I want to dig in a bit on what has changed the most there, what lineups have worked the most, and how Minnesota has kind of, counteracted that. We'll also get into a little bit of, I didn't get a chance on the show Tuesday, which was the post-game pod from Monday's win. I meant to get into some of the garbage time minutes and who played really well in those, some of the observations of Joan Beringer. So I want to dig in on that a bit today, talk about the garbage time minutes and the takeaways, especially the young players. And then we'll get into the Wolves-Wizards matchup on Wednesday night. Washington is one of the worst two teams in the league, we'll call it, to this point in the season. So we'll break that down toward the end of the show here today, too. So lots to get to. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you'd like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. All right. So far this season, we covered this a couple of weeks ago, and it was kind of like right in the midst of, or toward the beginning of that initial, 4 or 5 game winning streak, about the Rudy on-off numbers. Basically, just the lineups with Rudy, the lineups without Rudy, the dramatic difference between those. With Rudy on the court, I'll just give you the number right now. Minnesota with Rudy on the court has an 85th percentile. I'll said a different way, said a better way. All their lineups with Rudy are 85th percentile, plus 10.9 net rating. They're 91st percentile defensively, and they're at this point 64th percentile offensively, which both of those numbers have kind of actually evened out a little bit over the last few days. With Rudy off the court, however, Minnesota's defense, even now, to date, and I'm going to give you some numbers that show this maybe improving a little, is a 4th percentile defense. They give up 127.1 points per 100 possessions with Rudy off the floor, but the offense is 96th percentile. Overall, without Rudy, Minnesota is a minus 1.1 net rating in 5-man lineups without Rudy. So, what has Minnesota found success doing here of late that has, I think, kind of stemmed the tide, if you will? Now, again, caveats apply as always. The caveat here is, besides the small sample size of only being, what are we, 14 games into the season? Am I crazy? I think it's 14 games. I think the Wolves are 9-5. The other caveat is, of course, the quality of opponent, or the lack of quality of opponent here recently. We talk about this extensively on, I think, Friday's show, Monday's show. Look, the Wolves have played some bad teams lately. That's true. They've lost to a bunch of good teams. That's true. Guess what? That's what we have to go off of. That's the last 4.5 weeks. That's where we're at right now. So that's the data we have. And you know what? Until they play the Thunder a week from now, they play 4 bad teams between now and then. And even after the Thunder, it's still a pretty soft schedule between now and essentially January. So the data we have is the data we have. And another day we'll dig into how has the Wolves defense performed against top offenses and how has the offense performed against top defenses. I'm not going to do that today, but that is something you can filter that on Cleaning the Glass. I think it's pretty interesting. As of right now, though, Minnesota's solve for non-Rudy lineups has been hey, we got to have Jaden McDaniels and Jaylen Clark on the floor together. It's still a relatively not relatively, a very small sample, because this is a recent development. Remember, Jaylen Clark missed a couple of games anyway. There's been a couple games he didn't play as much, especially earlier in the season. And so we're only talking a sample of 67 possessions with McDaniels and Clark together and Rudy off the floor. But McDaniels and Jaylen Clark together with Rudy Gobert off the floor in 67 possessions are a 99th percentile five-man unit, or five-man units that include McDaniels and Clark are 99th percentile. They're a plus 21.2. Offensively, believe it or not, 100th percentile, 130, almost 136 points per 100 possessions. And the most used lineup, 44 of those 67 possessions, along with McDaniels and Clark, don't even include Anthony Edwards. It's with Mike Conley, Julius Randle, and Reid. It's just a play fast, kind of rip it and go lineup led by Randle and Reid, with McDaniels playing off of that, and Conley and Clark just kind of playing the bit role, spot up shooters, that sort of a thing. Defensively, this isn't going to sound that great, but it's 55th. The 67 possessions with McDaniels and Clark with no Rudy Gobert are a 55th percentile defensive unit, about a little over 114 points per 100 possessions. 55th percentile is pretty meh, right? Not great. However, it's better than the alternative. Remember when we did just Rudy off the floor, and that thing was fourth percentile, right? So much better. Because if you split them up, like if you had Jaden without Jaylen, that number is not quite as appealing. The defensive unit, in fact, drops from 55th percentile to the 0th percentile, 141 points per 100 possessions. 160 possessions of Jaden McDaniels without Rudy Gobert or Jaylen Clark. And this isn't to rip on Jaden McDaniels. It's more of a Jaylen Clark praise session. Jaden McDaniels lineups with no Gobert and no Clark are a 0 percentile defensively, 141 points per 100 possessions. Somehow they're a 97th percentile offensively, but overall that still nets out to a minus 13.9, an 11th percentile unit. That is significant. And it's praise for Jaylen Clark much more than it is, ripping on Jaden McDaniels by any stretch. The flip is really interesting. Jaylen on the floor with no Jaden is still a 48th percentile defensive unit in 131 possessions. So a similar sample, actually. And those units are a plus 7.1, an 88th percentile offensively. So what does this tell us? Well, first of all, Jaylen Clark is awesome. Second of all, Rudy Gobert is really good at defense. And third of all, McDaniels and Clark play extremely well together. And by the way, in case this shouldn't be surprising, but if you look at Minnesota's overall on-off, like strictly on-off, so not five-man lineups, Julius Randle's number one because the offensive units of Julius Randle are just unreal. Gobert's number two, which is always the case. He's always in the top 2 or 3. Jaylen Clark is number 3, a plus 10.6 on-off. DiVincenzo, Edwards, those are the only other guys that are above 65th percentile in terms of the on-off differential. Jaden's down there a little bit at 48th percentile, just a very slight negative. And again, that's not a rip on Jaden McDaniels, although, while the offensive game is better, it's still not always super efficient. A couple of rockier games shooting lately, but it's more of a, hey, look, Jaylen Clark is amazing. And the obvious calculus here is it's really not calculus. It's basic arithmetic. You take your best defender, your best, your 4-time defensive player of the year, Rudy Gobert, off the floor. You got to have your second and third best defenders on the floor if you're going to try and make up for any semblance or any portion of the defense that's sitting on the bench. If your number one guy leaves, your 2 and 3 have to be on the floor together. And it also tells me that who's been the second most valuable defensive player this year next to Rudy Gobert? It's Jaylen Clark. It's Jaylen Clark. And I don't think and actually the strict on-off numbers actually bear that out entirely. The defense with Rudy Gobert off the floor is almost 20 points per 100 possessions worse. Jaylen Clark is the only other guy on cleaning the glass. It's essentially like a heat map. They do, like, if you're above league average, if you're above the 50th percentile, it turns orange the higher you get, and everything below 50th is blue. There's only 2 guys that are actually in orange. Rudy Gobert is 99th percentile at almost 20 points per 100 possessions. The defense is 20 points per 100 possessions worse with him off the floor. And Jaylen Clark is second on the Wolves, 84th percentile, minus 7.5. The only other guy that's above 50th percentile is Mike Conley. the defense has been basically average so far. So that makes sense. Jaden's not in the same neighborhood. In fact, the defense has actually been better with Jaden off the floor. Again, not a McDaniels rip as much as it is a Clark and Gobert. And that's why on-off isn't always like, it's not perfect, because it also tells you how good the guys are that are playing in their stead, right? Or how bad they are, right? So in this case, it tells you Gobert is the best defensive player on the team. Clark is the second best defensive player on the team through 14 games. And McDaniels is next up, right? I think that's fascinating. And I think Chris Finch and the Timberwolves coaching staff has certainly unlocked something that's super important. If your best defensive player is on the bench and you're a kind of so-so defensive team already, you got to have your second and third best defensive players on the floor together when your best guy sits. And again, Jaylen Clark on the floor without Gobert and Jaden, similar sample size as McDaniels on the floor without Gobert and Clark, and those units are better. Pretty fascinating stuff, if you ask me. I want to get into some of those garbage time minutes from the other night, and I know it doesn't sound like an appealing topic, but it is when we're talking about young Timberwolves players that we're all interested to see how they do moving forward, and an extended stint of garbage time too. It was like almost 10 minutes for some of these guys instead of just like 45 seconds. So we actually have something to look at that I didn't have time to do on the post-game pod on Tuesday. So we'll do that next, and then we'll close today by looking at Wolves Wizards, peeking ahead to tonight's game. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at SKIMS. When SKIMS announced that they were making underwear for men, the reaction made perfect sense. People have been talking about SKIMS comfort for years. Most guys, though, stick to whatever they've been buying since college. I get that. The same fits, the same waistbands that roll on you and things like that, and a whole lot of settling. SKIMS Men's changes that. One upgrade, and it's obvious why everyone's been talking. SKIMS was good enough to send us some samples, and I'll tell you what, they're fantastic. I get the hype. I completely get it. The rolling waistband thing is definitely a problem with a lot of other brands. But now that I've tried SKIMS, I know that doesn't have to be the case. They're designed to feel good. They fit right, and they actually stay put. No slipping, no sagging, no adjusting, just genuinely great underwear that makes you feel confident and comfortable. My favorite pair that I ordered is the 5-inch stretch. They're fantastic. I like a little bit longer boxer briefs, and they fit extremely nicely. The fabric, it's soft. They're supportive. They're comfortable all day long. They don't ride up. They don't lose shape. I don't work out a ton, transparently, but I'm fairly active. I walk a lot for my job, etc. And they don't ride up too high. They fit comfortably throughout the day, whether you're working, traveling, working out, maybe you're just hanging out at home. You may not expect your underwear to be a game changer, but SKIMS completely surprised me. Shop SKIMS Men's now at skims.com. And when you place your order, choose podcast in the post-purchase survey and select this show from the dropdown to let them know that we sent you. Plus, the SKIMS Holiday Shop is now open. So if you're looking for the perfect gift this season, SKIMS has you covered. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is also brought to us by our friends at FanDuel, our title sponsors of today's show. The NBA is now almost 5 weeks into the season. There's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand of any given game, maybe it's tonight's Wolves-Wizards game, I feel like Ant's going to have a big game. Feels like the opponent he could do it against. He's due. He's struggled from the field the last couple of games. FanDuel has live bets too. So depending on how the game starts, you want to, place your wager partway through. You can live bet it. You could check out, you think maybe the Wolves are down a little bit in the second half, God forbid, against the Wizards, and you think they're going to make a late comeback. You can combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making a late push. As of right now, as of this recording, the Timberwolves are 15.5-point favorites at home against the Wizards on Wednesday night, which is, I was about to say the biggest line I've seen in a while, but the Thunder are actually 19-point favorites at home against Sacramento. So, I don't know, biggest Wolves favorites I've seen in a while, which, yes, makes me a little bit nervous. But Minnesota, 15.5 at home, and I actually don't mind it. I don't mind Wolves minus 15.5, which I was dead on, by the way, last Friday when I thought the line was a bit too high for the Minnesota. I forget. I'm blanking now who they played. The Kings, maybe Utah. It feels like half their games have been against Utah or Sacramento. And I was right about that. I actually don't mind 15.5 in this game. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thanks once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. And of course, thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. That's right. We are #1, and we could not do it without you, the loyal listener. A big thank you for listening every single day. All right. We talked about the lineup stuff. I think it's pretty fascinating. Keep an eye on it. And I would imagine we see the Timberwolves coaching staff play around with it a little bit more over the next few games. Washington tonight. Let's see who else. I don't know. It's an easy schedule upcoming. And it wouldn't be surprising to see more. Like, remember, Dillingham played 8 minutes of the second quarter against Dallas on Monday night. So we may see some more Dillingham minutes. We may see some more extended minutes with the non-Rudy defensive combinations, centered around Clark and McDaniels, because that seems to make a lot of sense. I think that'll be pretty interesting to watch. I don't know that we'll see rotation minutes. Of course, CJ Shannon's out. The team announced last Friday he'd be reevaluated in a week, so we're not quite there yet with the bone bruise in his foot. I don't think we're going to see actual rotation minutes for Leonard Miller or Joan Beringer. You never know. I think it's unlikely. Now, in Monday's blowout win over Dallas, Miller was actually the first guy off the bench. In fact, Leonard Miller came in less than 2 minutes into the fourth quarter, and it was a 20 plus. It was a 24, 25, 26 point game, something like that. But he came on the floor with other rotation guys. Reid was out there. I think Jaylen Clark was out there. I think Mike Conley, maybe it was DiVincenzo, but there were actual rotation players on the floor when Miller first came out there, which was really nice for him to get a couple minutes of run. And there's been a couple of kind of semi-garbage time games that other guys have gotten in, and Miller did not. So it was nice to see him get on the floor. I thought he played pretty well. He didn't score. He shot 2 threes and missed them both, but he had 3 assists. He had a steal. He had 3 rebounds, was active enough to get called for 3 fouls in 10 minutes. But I'm interested still in Leonard Miller. I really would be surprised if he ends up ever with a rotation role with Minnesota, but I think there's some trade value there. I bet they could move him if they needed to for a second-round pick. I think there's teams that would be intrigued. He's been good enough at the G League level. I think he's shown improvement there over the last 3 years. Remember, he was a G League Ignite guy. I just don't know that, the defense and the activity and the rebounding isn't there to even fill a Josh Minott role, which is a fringy rotation guy. But the offensive upside is greater than that of a Josh Minott. It's just, will he ever be able to see the floor long enough to realize that? And, I don't think it happens in Minnesota, but I'm intrigued anytime he sees the floor. So it's good to see Lenny get out there for 10 minutes the other night. Nothing really to say about Bones Highland. Bones Highland continues to be Bones Highland. We talked about Dillingham, and his, the box score line. I talked about him pretty extensively on Tuesday's show. So if you're a Dilly guy or gal, you enjoy Rob Dillingham, listen to what I said Tuesday. The box score doesn't look good. If you miss the game, you look at the box score, Dillingham did not play well, right? That's what you would say. I thought he played okay on Monday. Tuesday's show is when I talked about it. I thought he was active. I thought the decision-making was good. He's got to make shots. He had a layup blocked. I think that was maybe the only bad decision he made in terms of the shots he took. He did manage to pull the trigger 12 times in 13 minutes. But I didn't mind the Dillingham game, and I thought he was good in garbage time. The process was good. The results were just bad in some of these instances. Beringer, I did not get a chance to talk about, though. I thought what we saw over the final several minutes of the win over the Mavs on Monday, and Beringer ultimately played 8 minutes, it was kind of more of what we saw in Las Vegas in the Summer League for Beringer. 8 minutes, 6 points on 4 shots, knocked down a couple of free throws, 4 rebounds in those 8 minutes. One of them offensive, so about the ratio you'd expect, 3 defensive, 1 offensive rebounds, and he had a nice block. It was a well-rounded, active 8 minutes, which is exactly what you want to see from Beringer. I think this is an impossible thing to actually know or to even really predict. But I think if Beringer was on a team call it the Washington Wizards, right? A hopeless team, not going anywhere, losing a bunch of games. And if they just threw him out there for 28 minutes a game, essentially a full game's worth of minutes, I bet he's putting up 12 and 10. with 2.5 blocks a game. Like I think ultimately it wouldn't be super efficient. There'd be a lot of turnovers mixed in there. You'd have some 3 seconds on both ends of the floor. You'd have some balls go out, clank off his hands because he's still very raw. He's like a baby deer. And I mean that in the best possible way. But the activity level is so good and the feel is so good. And I know I said all this in the summer. I said it after the draft and I said it after seeing him play in Vegas Summer League. But like this was 8 minutes of the same thing. Like understanding the timing, spacing, the rhythm of a pick and roll. Like Joe Ingles was trying to spam that pick and roll with Joan Beringer, and he did it to some success in garbage time the other night. Again, for a guy that's played for less than 5 years, that feel is just incredible. And the activity level is very encouraging that he's playing this hard, that he's generally in the right place at the right time on both ends of the floor. The defensive glass is still something that needs some work. We talked about this when he did see some garbage time minutes earlier this season. He gets pushed around a little bit. Box out isn't great, but offense, when it's basically see ball, get ball, like just go get it, like a center fielder going to track down a fly ball in the gap. That's what Beringer is like on the offensive glass. The defensive glass, the technique, the strength, the toughness, the build of his body they got to work on that. So he should not be playing a rotation minute. So back to what I said a minute ago, I was just saying like if we saw this extrapolated out over like a game's worth of minutes, a regular like length of stint over the course of several games, I think that's kind of what we'd see. I think we'd see about double production from Beringer. There'd just be a lot of, 19-year-old moments. But I'm very encouraged by Joan Beringer. I liked everything I saw from him. Johnny Juzang did what he does. He was 1 of 2 on threes. That's kind of all he did, and that's fine. And that's it. Other than Joe Ingles, who was Joe Ingles, right? He tried to spam that pick and roll, and he had 1 assist and no turnovers and 1 steal, and like that's a typical garbage time Joe Ingles line, I think. So encouraged by Beringer. I would say encouraged by Dillingham. Juzang did what he's supposed to do. Leonard Miller, not a whole lot to write home about there, but encouraged, hopeful we see him more over the next couple of weeks as there's perhaps Wednesday we get another quarter's worth of garbage time. That would be the goal. All right, let's close by looking at Wednesday night's game. Wolves Wizards. We haven't seen Washington yet this year, and they are not good. We'll talk about that matchup here next to close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Rippling. If you're a business owner, here's the truth. SaaS promised to make your work easier, but now the average company is buried by hundreds of apps that slow down your teams and simply don't work together. That's not SaaS. That's sad. Software as a disservice. That's why you need Rippling. Rippling is the unified platform for global HR, payroll, IT, and finance all in one place. They've helped millions of businesses replace a mess of disconnected tools with one system designed to give leaders clarity, speed, and control. Perhaps the best thing about Rippling is that it removes bottlenecks and busy work that often slows teams down, and everything from onboarding to payroll to IT access runs automatically and perfectly in sync. It's seriously simple to use and gives companies one source of truth for their people, data, and everything that they touch. Whether you want to run your entire HR, IT, and finance operations as one, or just fill the gaps in your software stack, Rippling can do it all. And right now you can get 6 months free when you go to rippling.com/LockedOnNBA. Learn more at rippling.com. That's rippling.com/LockedOnNBA. That's rippling.com/LockedOnNBA for 6 months free. All right, the Timberwolves take on the Washington Wizards here on Wednesday night. And let's just say this is another game the Wolves should win. I talked about this earlier in the show. The FanDuel line right now is minus 15.5 for Minnesota. They're favored by 15.5 points. Washington is one of just 2 teams in the NBA, both in the Eastern Conference, that have only 1 win. The Wizards and Pacers. Wizards are 1-12. The Pacers are 1-13. The Wizards actually do have the worst point differential in all of basketball. They're a minus 16.7 right now. The Pacers are second worst. The Pelicans are third worst. And yeah, the Wolves have played a lot of bad teams. They did play the Pacers once. They have not played the Wizards. They have not played the Pelicans, which are the other two of the 3 worst teams in the league. They have played the 2-win Nets and the 3-win Kings. Once the Nets, the Kings twice. So yeah, they played a lot of bad teams, but have not played the Wizards yet. Always proceed with caution against a bad team, of course, especially with the Wolves. This year to this point, through 14 games, Minnesota has beaten the teams they're supposed to beat. They've lost to teams that are as good or better than them, and they have not had any upset wins. Upset's a weird word in the NBA, but like they haven't beaten anybody above them in the standings, right? Like they lost the Lakers twice. They've lost the Nuggets twice. Caveats apply, of course, back-to-backs, etc. They lost to the Knicks. Who else have they lost to? That's it, right? Who am I forgetting? I think that's it. So, yeah, I mean, like, they haven't beaten good teams. They haven't lost to bad teams. That could always change at any point. Washington is a special version of miserable. They don't actually have anybody in the injured report. Like, they're a healthy team. There's not a whole lot of, like, actual NBA talent on this team. You've still got, like, guys who can put up stat lines like a Marvin Bagley who comes off the bench for them, but, like, is productive. Alex Sarr, I think, is intriguing. I like him. Corey Kispert, his role has shrunk over the last couple of years. He's been in Washington for his entire career. I think he's a rotation player. Like, I think he's a nice player. There's like Chris Middleton and CJ McCollum are just at this point mid-range jump shooters on a bad team. Like I feel like on a good team they could be valuable. Keyshawn George, I think he's intriguing. I liked him in the draft last year, and he's averaging 17 a game so far this year and 45% for three. Like the offensive Keyshawn George is very intriguing. So there are some guys to keep an eye out for. Like I would say just from a like fun to watch and offensive upside, like Keyshawn George is the guy that I'm most interested by. Again, Kispert in terms of a rotation player. We know McCollum and Middleton are guys that have been around forever. And then Alex Sarr, of course, is an effective defender. And to this point, he's done what he needs to do offensively. Overall, though, this Washington team, on cleaning the glass there, I already said they have the worst point differential in the standings. Cleaning the glass, they're 30th in their differential. They're 28th in offense and 29th in defense. We saw the worst defensive team already with Brooklyn. They're 30th right now. And we just saw the worst offensive team with Dallas. They're 30th in offense and actually passable defensively. So this Washington team, though, like they're bottom 10 in every single four factor on both ends of the floor. The opponent effective field goal percentage is 21st. That's their best mark. Like, that at this stage of the season can be just as much noise as anything else. Like, I don't know that they're like especially good at, contesting shots or anything. And they have some decent length. I don't know that that's necessarily it. They don't force turnovers. They foul a lot. They're a bad rebounding team on both ends of the floor. There's really not a whole lot in terms of redeeming qualities for the way the Wizards have played to this point. They do play fast, which, for a team to create a high variance and get up and down the floor and, give themselves a chance again in a higher variance game, give themselves a shot. That's something the Wolves will have to look out for is the Wizards just playing really fast. That's kind of it. Like they're not a good rebounding team. Like I said, like a lot of times these bad teams, you got to look out for like offensive rebounding. They're 26th in offensive rebound rate. Like there's nothing there that really scares you. The only team they've beaten is the Mavericks, and it was the second game of the season. They won at Dallas by 10. They haven't won a home game yet this year. They're on the road, obviously, in Minnesota in this one. Most recently, they lost to the Nets, who are also miserable, by 23 points. Before that, they lost to the Rockets by 23 points. They did only lose by a bucket at the Pistons, who have won a billion games in a row. So that's interesting. They lost at home to the Mavs by 6. Before that, to the Cavs by 33. So, like, we're talking the only time they've had they've had, 2 single-digit losses in their last 10 games? They're 0-10 with 2 single-digit losses in their last 10, I believe, if I'm reading that correctly. So Minnesota should win this one going away. Look out for, in terms of individuals that can do stuff, like Keyshawn George shooting threes. Like Bub Carrington, too, is a good three-point shooter. Kispert's a solid three-point shooter. Those are the guys from outside the arc. Not a big offensive rebounding team. Alex Sarr is really the only guy you got to worry about in the offensive glass. And again, defensively, there's nothing like they're the worst defensive rebounding team in the league. Jaden McDaniels' corner crashes should be successful in this game. Gobert should be able to dominate the paint. Naz Reid should be active on the glass. Julius Randle should be able to bully ball wherever he wants, however he wants. And then keep an eye on the rotations, like we talked about earlier in the show. The non-Rudy defensive minutes, this is another team Minnesota should be able to dominate with those minutes. So keep an eye on that. Man, there's something else that I just reminded myself of talking about that, and now I can't think of what it was. So, yeah, I mean, keep an eye on all of the above. I think those are the areas that the Minnesota being able to guard some of these guys like on the perimeter will be important. Oh, I know what it was. McDaniels, his wrist injury. So he's listed as questionable with a sore wrist. Keep an eye on it. On the one hand, it's the Wizards. They may sit him, just save him for Friday. But on the other hand, they're not on a back-to-back. He didn't seem worse for the wear on Monday necessarily. So I guess we'll see. We'll see if he plays Wednesday night. But that's something to keep an eye on. Nobody on the injury report as of right now, as of this recording for Washington. Of course, the live postcast with Jack and Luke will be on Locked On Wolves on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, it'll be the episode after this on YouTube on the Locked On Wolves channel. And same thing, audio, actually, too. The next episode will be the postcast with Luke and Jack. They do a nice, tidy 20 minutes post-game live after each and every Wolves game. I'll be back on Thursday with the regular post-game pod on both Locked On Wolves on YouTube as well as wherever you like to listen to podcasts. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, you can listen anywhere. You can watch on YouTube, as mentioned. And a reminder for your second listen, you can check out the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast with our guy, Josh Lloyd. The best fantasy basketball podcast out there. He'll make you an expert. You can find that wherever you listen to podcasts as well as on YouTube as well. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest story. And, of course, the #1 sports podcast network you can find. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.